Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, after having to reschedule the session of Dr. Hilal Ahmed, we finally have him. Have him to talk about politics of dialogue. Hilal Ahmed is an associate professor at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, CSDS, New Delhi. He works on political Islam, Muslim politics of representation, and politics of symbols in South Asia. His first book, Muslim Political Discourse in Postcolonial India, Monuments, History, Contestation, explores these thematic concerns to evolve an interdisciplinary approach to study Muslim politics. His recent works, Siyasi Muslims, A Story of Political Islam in India, and Democratic Accommodations, Minorities in Contemporary India, further elaborate these themes and make a modest attempt to explain the discursively constituted nature of contemporary Muslim political discourse in India. Ahmed did his PhD from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. You're welcome, Dr. Ahmed. You have up to 5 p.m. for this session today, and you can conduct it the way you like. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Behzad, for this generous introduction. Before I start, because this is for the first time I am delivering a lecture on dialogue in a virtual platform. So it would be sensible that if we make it a dialogue instead of me speaking and you listening. So first thing is that I do not want you to mute yourself. Just unmute your thing and your camera so that I can see all of you. And whenever you have any question or whenever you have any comment to make, you please feel free and make intervention so that we can have some informed and live discussion. I don't want to make it a very boring sort of thing. So that's the first clarification and a request. I cannot see ZHK, who is this. And there is another request because it is on dialogue. So I would like to spend first 5 minutes requesting all of you to say something about your background. So it will give me some kind of a context in which I can place my argument, which I am going to make. So I request all of you to introduce yourself very quickly, your name and your discipline.
Well, Dr. Hilal Ahmed, I am Sabiha More. I am in Mumbai. I am an associate professor in a college of education. My discipline is education. For the last 30 years, I have been teaching and imparting guidance to make good teachers in country. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, sir. My name is Ziaul Haq. I belong from Bihar and I did my master's and MPhil in development studies. Now I am pursuing PhD from JNU.
From?
JNU.
Which
JNU.
Department?
Center for the Study of Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policy. Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policy.
Thank you.
I read your book, sir, Siyasi Muslims.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll talk about it. Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Thank you. Yeah. Next.
Sir, this is Mohammad Baliq from Hyderabad. I am a postgraduate in geopolitics and international relations from Manipal University.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tausif. I'm from Bangalore. I'm a software engineer by profession, and I'm here to learn a lot about dialogue studies.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, my name is Anas. Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
My name is Anas. I'm doing my master's in international relations and area studies in the...
Anas, yeah, I cannot hear you. I think there's some there is some problem with your internet.
I'm doing my master's at Jawaharlal Nehru University
Okay, which department?
in International Relations and Area Studies, Masters, School of International Studies.
Okay, yeah. Next.
Sir, my name is Asruddin. I'm from Kerala. Now I am doing my master's in Jamia Millia Islamia. I'm in conflict analysis and peacebuilding.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Done?
Hello. Yeah, I'm Deepthi Raghavendra.
Yeah.
I teach at a management college in Mumbai.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Is that all? Behzad?
There are more, sir. Saif,
Okay.
Saeed, Mushtaq, Nitya, please.
Hello.
Please introduce yourself.
Hello.
Yeah, Saif.
Javed it is. Yes.
Yeah, Javed. Yeah.
Yes, I'm Javed. I'm so sorry for my camera because I'm trying to fix it. I'm Javed
That's fine.
Asefy.
Yeah.
I'm
yeah.
from Kabul, Afghanistan.
Mhm.
I'm freshly graduated from MSc Chemistry,
Mhm.
and I'm also working in Kabul University as technical assistant. And I'm here to. I'm very happy to attending your class.
Thank you. Yeah, next.
Hello, Professor. This is me, Mohammed Saif. I finished my university bachelor's in information technology, and currently I'm teaching English in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan. I like learning things. That's why I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you. I also like learning things.
My name is Sahidullah. I'm from Kyrgyzstan. At the moment, I'm a teacher in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah. Good afternoon. This is Skandar. I am from Kashmir and I have done my MPhil in political science from Kashmir.
From my tribe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that all, Behzad?
No.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah. Urida. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Urida Rafiki and
Rita, we can't hear you. Okay, Nitya, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. Good afternoon, sir. I'm Nitya, and I'm a student of psychoanalysis, and I have submitted my PhD recently from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and I'm waiting for my viva, which is soon scheduled. Thank you.
So which department did you submit your PhD?
I submitted in the Department of Educational Studies, sir.
Okay, yeah. Best of luck for your viva. Viva is just a formality in most of the cases in Indian universities.
Yes.
So don't worry about it. Best of luck for that. So is that all, Behzad?
Thank you.
Urusa.
yeah, hello, good afternoon. I'm sorry about the internet connection. It's very bad here.
Yes, Urida, please.
Yeah.
My name is Urida. I have done my bachelor's in economics from Jamia Millia Islamia, and I'm currently pursuing development from Azim Premji University, Bangalore, and I'm based in Kashmir.
Okay, yeah. You know, this is my experience that the internet connection in Kashmir is not so good, so we can bear that with you. That's perfectly understandable.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Maria.
Good evening, sir. Okay, should I? Yeah. Good evening, sir. My name is Urusa. I'm from Kashmir. Right now, I'm a doctoral student. I'm based in the UK. I'm pursuing my PhD on intercultural dialogue, which is why I am here.
Yeah, good. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ziaul Hassan, would you like to introduce yourself? Ziaul Hassan.
Yeah, sure. Hello, good afternoon, Dr. Hilal. I am Ziaul Hassan and I am from UP Gorakhpur. I am pursuing PhD from Jamia Millia Islamia in Department of Biosciences. And apart from that, I am interested in social work, so that's why I joined this course.
Good, yeah.
Saideep. Saideep? Saideep, can you hear me?
Hello, sir. Able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. Saideep. I worked with the Government of India in New Delhi. Sir. Right now, I'm in Hyderabad.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So,
yes,
Behzad, is that all?
Yes, there are 29 students in total. So yeah, it takes time.
Yeah. Thank you very much, all of you, for introducing yourself. First thing which is in my view, first of all, I would like to begin with a few clarifications that this particular lecture is about the questions which are my questions. And I do not want to impose or represent these questions as if that these are the universal questions. So these are my questions, and I have decided to respond to these questions in a very specific way. So certainly this is my what you call conceptual framework in which I am going to place these questions with regard to politics of dialogue. And finally, a few sources which I am going to use. These are my sources. So the clarification is that the interpretation which I draw from my sources is entirely mine. And these sources, or the story which I'm going to narrate in front of you, is subject to multiple reinterpretation. So therefore, I would like, or I would request you, all of you, to be critical. And because we have a very mixed group of people, so therefore I would like to make it very, very simple and general. Unfortunately, there was a death in my family today, so I'm straight away coming from the graveyard. So I did not get time to prepare a PowerPoint, but I have my points with me at the moment, and I'll try to structure my talk in this way, and then we'll talk about the issues which I'm going to raise in my talk. But as I said, that this talk is entirely about dialogue. So it would be very important for all of us to be active and to be critical, as well as we assert what we think. So therefore, this is not one-way traffic. I would encourage you to be critical and to raise your question whenever the question comes to your mind. With these clarifications, let me start with the idea of the topic. The topic is called politics of dialogue. And in this formulation, I am basically raising two things. One is politics and another one is dialogue. And I am sure you must have had different lectures on the idea of dialogue. Yeah. So let us just start with the idea of politics first, because this is the area in which I work. And I don't want you to go back to your school textbook or the college textbook in which politics is defined and conceptualized. And a synthesis of that, and to invite you to travel with me in the ways in. So basically, politics by all means could have two very, and this is also very commonsensical, that politics is always defined in two ways. One is the dominant negative meaning of politics. Whenever we say politics, we often talk about maneuvering. We often talk about capturing power. We often talk about the way in which people ditch each other, etc. So in a very negative sense, politics is something which is always understood as to maximize your interest, to control, and to establish control over others, etc. So this is a dominant negative meaning of politics. But there is a positive meaning of politics as well, which is given to us which is often given to us in our textbooks. And according to this positive meaning, Politics is all about institutionalizing to resolve issues, managing competing interests, etc. So on the one hand, we have a very practical oriented negative interpretation of politics. On the other hand, we have a different imagination. In this imagination, something ideal is proposed, something abstract is proposed, and we are told that it is all about institutionalization. So my meaning of politics rests in between these two. I do not want to propose that only the negative meaning of politics is right or the ideal abstract positive meaning is correct. Instead, I would like to look at the ways in which these two meanings interact with each other, meaning the negative meaning as well as the positive meaning. Okay, is that clear to all of you? You can also write in the chat box if you want anything. So I would like to begin with this straight away with this clarificatory statement about politics. And I categorically said that there are two possible ways in which we can understand politics, which is given to us. One is the very practical journalistic mode in which politics is always defined in negative terms. But there is another textbook style of definition of politics where politics is positively understood. So this is, in this sense, I think both the conceptualization are relevant for making sense of the activity which we call politics. But I urge you to look at the gray area. In what do I mean by gray area? Meaning the area where certain principles are interpreted to do practical things. Remember, politics is always done in the name of something. For example, if if you look at the worst regime of the world, say for example Hitler would also evoke certain principles. In Germany, there were certainly certain national socialism was based on certain ideas, and these ideas were presented the principles by which execution of Jews, etc., is justified. Therefore, as I said, that the actual activity called politics is always situated between the negative meaning of politics and the positive meaning of politics. So this is all about politics, and this is my interpretation. But this is largely the synthesis of the whole debate on the idea of politics and the political. So that's the first thing about the title, which I call politics. The second thing, in my view, is about dialogue. And as I said, that I imagine that you must have had some interesting conversation about the idea of dialogue itself in previous lectures. So I am not going to repeat those, but instead I would propose that dialogue is different from conversation. But certainly dialogue as an activity has got a few interesting components. And this is my interpretation of dialogue. It is not conversation. We are involved in a conversation. But when I invite you to speak, that would become dialogue in a very commonsensical sense. But I don't want to get into conversation versus dialogue thing. Instead, I would take dialogue as a concept. And then I press it and look at the ways in which that pressed concept takes us to. And in my view, there are actually 3 or 4 things which are crucial to understand the idea of dialogue, the way in which I define politics. So first and the foremost is that the dialogue should have 2 or more participants. So the participant is someone who is very crucial for performing the act of dialogue. Okay, so first thing is to have people or participant, and these participants are, in an ideal situation, again, you can imagine that both the participant or all the participant are equal. But in a practical scenario, it would be completely different to imagine that all the participant, the status of all the participant is equal, or they are operating at the same plan. In real life situation, this does not happen. So, but the important thing is so first and foremost is that we must have participants. Participant make dialogue tangible, and participant make this dialogue lively. Dialogue, dialogue does not happen in vacuum. You have two or more people. So that's the first condition which make a dialogue. The second condition, and which is a very powerful condition for having a dialogue, is agreement. That we agree to perform an act called dialogue. There is a famous saying, we agree to disagree. What does it mean? It means that we agree. Yeah, just a minute. Yeah, there is something happening here. Yeah, sorry. That's the problem with Zoom, that you can hear everything what is happening around my house. So that's fine. We were talking about various components of a dialogue. The first thing is that we need participant. So participant is the first thing. Second is that there is something called agreement. We must have some kind of an agreement to recognize a point of reference which will constitute a dialogue, or which will constitute the ways in which we are going to perform the act of dialogue. So that's the second condition. First is people. Second is that there should be some kind of a agreement or the reference point for a dialogue. The third thing is, which I called an issue. We agree to, we are participant, but there is something called an issue. Now, this issue is an important thing. So it could be an issue of conflict, but at the same time, it could be an issue where we both are agree from different point of views. So, we must be clear about this condition, that issue does not entirely mean a conflict. When we say let's have dialogue on this, it doesn't mean that we are saying that we have a conflict, let's resolve it. So it is not a conflict. So, but in many times it is conflict. But at the same time, there is a possibility that we do not have any conflict, but we can have dialogue instead. But in that situation, we have to have a very clear understanding of what I call, what I call the reference point thing, that we must agree that the participant must agree that there is an issue, and this issue requires some collective thinking. So this is about collective thinking. The fourth thing is the collective thinking. It does not mean that we arrive on a consensus. It does not mean that we will find out a solution. So finally, the fifth point is, so the first point is two or more participants. Second is that there is an agreement to have dialogue as an act. Third is we agree to have an issue. And finally, fourth is that we need not to resolve conflict. Rather, we could have differences of opinion. We could have different interpretation. This is the fourth point of a dialogue, fourth component of the dialogue. And finally, the success point of view, the success idea. Remember that the success and failure of dialogue is not the precondition of a dialogue. This is the fifth component of a dialogue. We should not assume that all dialogue, if suppose the dialogue stops, it does not mean it actually has got failed. Or if we reach to a conclusion, it does not mean that the dialogue was successful. And this is the point which I'm going to emphasize, the fifth condition, success and failure of dialogue. Dialogue is an ongoing process in which it is very difficult to evaluate the failure or the success of it. Sometimes we describe, for example, I think you must have had a lecture on Gandhi. If we look at Gandhi's three famous satyagrahas, or the three big movements which he led, we may say that these were entirely flop shows, because in 1921 he decided to take it back because of Chora Chori event, the famous non-cooperation movement of 1921. It was called off by Gandhi himself, and many people at that time and even now think that it was basically a failure. Second was in 1930s, civil disobedience movement, which was also not very successful the way it was organized initially by all standard of success. And finally, 1942. And if we look at the culmination of 1942, Quit India movement to the independence of India, we find that Gandhi's philosophical ideas were completely relegated to margin in Constituent Assembly, and he was not as powerful as he was as a leader during the time of national movement. So shall we say that dialogic, because his every act was dialogic in the sense which I have just described. So can we say that the movement Gandhi initiated were flop shows or successful? I think that's the crucial issue. It all depends the way in which we evaluate a dialogue, a success or a failure. This is our interpretation of a success or a dialogue. But what is needed is that it is very difficult to bracket an event called dialogue into two very clearly demarcated template, success or failure. Okay. So this is about dialogue. So let me just repeat what I just said. First thing is about politics. I said that politics could have two meanings, negative and positive, and real life, the activities of politics is actually played in between the gray area, in between these two given dominant interpretation. Second is I point out 5 different components of a dialogue. Again, this is my conceptualization of the idea of dialogue, in which first I said that we should have 2 or more participants. Second was that there should be some agreement to have a dialogue as an act. Third, we agree to have an issue. It could be a conflict or it could not be a conflict, etc. Fourth is that the dialogue not entirely be in relation to a conflict, but there can be for example, there is an issue and the dialogue not necessarily, because when the issue is there, it does not mean that the interpretation of the issue will remain static. So the changing nature of issue will also contribute to the different phases of dialogue, and finally the success and the failure. So these 5 components, in my view, are crucial to understand the politics of dialogue. Okay, if you have any question at the moment, let's just ask. Then I'll move to the second part of my presentation. No question?
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sir, can you just clarify a little bit on the difference between politics and political? Like at the level of conception or also at the level of practice, like how do we differentiate between the two? Of course, they are interlinked and embedded in each other.
Yeah, let me just write it down, yeah, so that it will be easy for me to answer. Politics and political. Okay, yeah. Any other question? Or shall I just respond to this, and then in the meantime, you can also think of your other question.
Yeah, Dr. Ahmed, I also am very curious to know that as a teacher, when we look at dialogue, we always say it's a two-way process, So just having the participant within a limited periphery of a space and the teacher teaching in the class comprises the definition of dialogue. And if that is what dialogue is, then all these, like addresses by great leaders, right? I don't want to name it, but right from Hitler to our own PM, where people are there, participation is there, issue is resolved, not resolved. Is that also having a shade of dialogue? Is that also a dialogue? And I don't know. I always feel dialogue has to be a two-way process. It cannot be just by mere presence of a few participants and non-resolving of issues. Uh, I don't know. I'm little zapped by what you have said right now. I'm trying to like seep into my system, but this is what I was thinking, that like
It's a very important question. First of all, Nitya, let me answer your question, and then this is linked to what Sabiha ji asked.
Yes.
Nitya, this is a crucial, fundamental political science question, and I do not want to answer the way in which it is answered in our textbooks. So, because that's highly misleading. That is important, but we have to, conceptualize this distinction in the way in which we understand politics, which is here and now, which is around us. For me, if you ask me this distinction, for me, politics is about the formal institutionalized mode in which certain ideas are designated as political. Yeah. For example, election. So for election, politics, when we say politics, so all the institutions that are part of that very activity called election will become politics, and the activity which is performed would become political. But that is not entirely what I mean political. Political is also something which is not entirely depend on institution. It can take many different forms. So the autonomy of activity called politics outside the sphere of institution, which would allow us to think more broadly about the institution as well as the principle on which those institutions are built, can be called political in my view. And there is an interesting book by Aditya Nigam, my colleague, very recently. So if you want, you can have, he has a very extensive discussion on politics and the political. And there is another book which has recently come out, which is called Elementary Aspect of the Political, in which the distinction which I am making is also made by Prathama Banerjee. Yeah? So these are the two books which I would refer to. But larger point is that politics is often understood in relation to certain institutions, and the political in this politics mean is the way in which that activity is carried out with reference to the institution. But political would allow us not merely to respond to this activity called politics through institution, but that would allow I can give you one example. I have recently finished a piece which I called Hindutva constitutionalism. Most of the time, we are told that Hindutva group are keen to replace the constitution, etc. But this is not the case. In last 20 years, Hindutva has redefined itself in order to accommodate itself in the framework of the constitution. And therefore, they have come out with a very interesting formulation, which I describe it as Hindutva constitutionalism. In my way, my interpretative exercise is political in that way. It would allow me to go beyond, because how public discourse is constituted with regard to Hindutva. There are so-called Hindutva Bhakt versus there are so-called liberal Bhakt. Yeah. So the liberal would say we respect constitution. What is interesting is that the Hindutva would also say we respect constitution. But if I am political, I would get out of this binary and then look at the principle in which the idea of constitution is rest on, and how that principle is interpreted by different political groups, including Hindutva. Yeah. So the political is a sphere. The formal structural meaning of politics. This is my response to your question. Sabiha ji, that's a very, very important and crucial question of dialogue studies. By the way, I'm not from the dialogue study, but this is what I tried to underline. The distinction which you are making is very crucial. Why is that crucial? Because dialogue could have different forms. In a classroom setting, teacher and student, they are also involved in some kind of a two-way process. And you are absolutely right that two-way processes are crucial. But in democracy, and that's why Nitya's question is very important, in a formal democratic setup, dialogue is also possible when we are given a right to vote and we also choose our elected representative. So the election is also dialogic. The political parties would come with certain packages. We choose those packages and the dialogue happens. Suppose we do not like, in an ideal condition, suppose if we do not like, we just get rid of the package and we will go for another candidate or another party. That is also dialogue in an abstract sense. But in real politics, and that's why my distinction between two meanings of politics are crucial. Why? Because certain principles are involved. Man Ki Baat, remember, Man Ki Baat of Narendra Modi is dialogic in abstract sense. But in another sense, it is how it is a dialogue, because he is saying that I'm collecting information through different channels and it is next to impossible for me to invite you to speak because I'm talking to 130 crore people. Technically, and if you read his website, he's exactly making the same point that it is next to impossible for one person to talk to 130 crore people at one go. So therefore, what is needed is a different mechanism. In Man Ki Baat, he says that I collect information, and that's why there is a reference to number of different individuals and processes. So he is right in abstract theoretical sense that it is a dialogue. But if we look at the politics of that dialogue, and that's a crucial point, it would become one-sided because state would like to tell you that this is a dialogue. So the crucial question Nitya was asking is that in the formal sense, it is dialogue. But in a different sense, which is the political sense, it is not dialogue, it is one-sided communication. State would like us to behave in a certain way, and this behavior is always justified in the name of dialogue. So therefore, the two-way process which Constitution envisages, Constitution of India is very crucial element in this way. I won't worship the Constitution, but I would recognize the significance of this document in our political life. So this political document is very crucial. And this political document provides us to have a dialogue of a different abstract kind. But this abstract dialogue would always get a political manifestation when it comes to real life politics. And this is what I'm going to talk about in this lecture. I hope I have answered your question. Yeah, any other question? You are mute, I cannot hear you.
What I'm trying no, sir. What I'm trying to say, that means we conclude that the classroom dialogue is far different from political dialogue.
Yes.
Is it?
Yes.
Thank
you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Any other question? Then we'll continue. Okay. If there is no question.
Hilal sir, there is not a question. It's just a comment. I intend that you will throw some light about it. You stated about the Hindutva kind of project and what you have stated. Is it something similar conclusions what Irfan Ahmed states about Jamaat Islami in his limits of Islamism? Is it a similar kind of conclusion that you have reached in your new piece on Hindutva also?
Okay. Any other question? Then I'll club a few questions and then I'll respond. Okay. See, what Irfan is saying, Irfan is analyzing he's a very close friend of mine. So he is analyzing a trajectory of a political party. Not political party, is a pressure group led to formation of a political party later on. And his argument is that because it was constituted in the realm of politics, which describe itself as democratic, so the basic contour which defined Jamaat-e-Islami at one point of time also changes. That was Irfan's argument. But my argument is very different. My argument is this document called Constitution. First of all, it was given to political parties at a very interesting moment when idea of India was not fully conceptualized. We certainly had different imagination of India in 1947, but the first general election of 1952 was very crucial. So when this constitution was given to the people, to the political parties who were new and who did not have they had their own imagination of India and the ideal kind of world which they wanted to constitute. But when this document came to them, they decided to evolve their own interpretation of this document. And therefore, two things happened. First, a language of constitutionalism evolved. So because they accepted to participate in election, they designed their ideologies according to the language which was written in the constitution. So, for example, Janasangh in 1950s would also talk about socialism in some ways. Or, for example, the left or the communist parties, there's a famous 1951 Communist Party resolution, which also says that we are highly uncomfortable with this constitution. But at the same time, we realize that it has got something called universal adult franchise, which would give some kind of a right to vote to everyone. So therefore, they are critical of it. And remember, JP came out with a book called A Plea for Reconstruction of Indian Polity. The book was published in 1959, in which JP was very critical of the constitution. So what is my point? My point is that when constitution was presented to different political parties, they did to design their political strategies. Second, they also evolved their own different mode of constitutionalism, their own interpretation of constitutionalism. And that somehow, on the one hand, that provided legitimacy to the constitution. But at the same time, that also somehow allow every political group to come out with their own interpretation of the constitutionalism. Hindutva constitutionalism is something which actually grew up from this larger framework. Unfortunately, if you look at the literature which that the constitution, the placing of constitution in the political discourse, has not given adequate intellectual attention. And this is something which we pay close attention to. This is basically this is very different from Irfan's argument. Okay. Yeah, there is some comment in the chat box. Okay, this is Ursa. Okay, this is about a response to the literature which Sabiha ji was asking. Okay, so shall we move, or is there any other question?
Hello.
Yeah.
Myself Shabista Naz. Actually, I just want a kind of clarification on the idea which you like just discussed regarding dialogue. Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So, like you said, like when we are having a dialogue, we should not think about the success and failure of it's a process, right? So, in that sense, like we always, when we initiate a dialogue, or in my understanding, what I think, like we always think that it should be successful. Otherwise, why we will do dialogue? What is the, what is the purpose of dialogue if we don't want it to be successful? I just want your clarification on that.
Yeah, awesome. Shabista, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. No, that makes politics of dialogue interesting, because politics of dialogue is not entirely about finishing it. Rather, there are instances, and one of the instances which I would like to talk about in later part of my presentation, in which both the parties decided to have a dialogue and to have a failure of that dialogue as well. So both agree to have dialogue, but at the same time with the intention that dialogue should not be succeeded. So there are instances, and that's why the politics of dialogue is crucial. And that is the dialogue initiated by the state in 1990s on the question of Babri Masjid. Both Babri Masjid Action Committee and the Babri Masjid Movement Coordination Committee, as well as Vishwa Hindu Parishad, agree to disagree that we should have number of dialogues, but we do not want to concede even a single suggestion given by the other side. But they both wanted dialogue. So the point is, therefore, the nature of politics of dialogue must be understood. It is also to create politics. I should be seen like that. That's another important aspect of a dialogue. It is related to what Sabiha ji asked. Remember that dialogue is not about public dialogue. Dialogue is not about a communication between two or more people. It is also a theater which is seen by others. If I am talking to you and I am seen by others talking to you, you are not the only respondent for me. My act is also my gestures, and the way in which I communicate things to you also have got certain meanings which can be interpreted very differently by the people who are supposed to be outside of this dialogue. So therefore, what I am saying is that the politics of dialogue is contingent upon the ways in which the idea of dialogue as a theater is constituted. Okay, so I'll elaborate that when I come to my case study. Yeah, any other question, because this is getting very interesting. Yeah, is there any question, any other question, or shall we?
Not a question.
Yeah.
Just an analogy, as you were speaking about the Babri Masjid kind of case and the dialogue between BHP and others. Because I come from Kashmir, and now a dialogue, particularly between the separatists, those who are asking for secession, and the Indian state, has been going on since 47. And now it has reached to a point where the politics of dialogue is stated that the dialogue has delegitimized. Now no militant organization or separatist groups wants to talk with the Indian state, because they state that just the Indian state intends to engage us in an unending process of dialogue, where at the end they will not give you anything. They will not bring down the militarization. They will not bring down the human rights violations. The other perpetuators will not be brought to the book. So that's why, in a certain sense, now the dialogue as an institution has got retrograded or so much degraded in our Kashmiri lexicon that nobody wants to initiate it or engage in any sense with the state. So can it be stated that an impasse has been reached in certain situations? Is there some other analogy like you stated about Babri Masjid and now the dialogue in case of Kashmir also delegitimized? So can we draw parallels or something like that, that both the Indian state doesn't want it or the Kashmiris for the Kashmiri this has again delegitimized? So just a thought about it.
Mushtaq, that's a wonderful question. Thank you very much for making this dialogue so interesting. Let me just clarify my position. I am not here to answer here. My self-perception in this dialogic situation is simply this, that we all are participating in a dialogue which, again, the 5 points which I underline, in which we agree, we have an issue, etc., and we are not bothered about the success and failure. Rather, we want to just the idea is to have an informed sort of conversation that can be converted into a dialogic mode. And this is so that's why whatsoever I am, my responses are not answers. My responses are basically to guide the process, because somehow my role is as a moderator is recognized by the structure in which we are talking to each other. Okay, if this is the case, then politics of dialogue. First of all, Babri Masjid is not a closed case. Babri Masjid issue has found a new political meaning, and we need to recognize those meanings. This is something which I would like to talk about later. But coming back to the specific issue which you raised about Kashmir, no, there was, the point I just made. Dialogue was also a theater in case of Kashmir. So the separatist state dialogue was seen by not merely by the people of Kashmir. It was seen by the mainland India. It was seen by the world outside. And it was somehow, whenever you find it difficult to make a case, you would say that I'm going to constitute a committee, and that committee would tell us how to do dialogue. So that institutionalization of dialogue is something which was used by the separatists as well as the state for a long time. The separatists would say that we need a committee. The state said we are constituting a committee. Then the committee would is made. They travel, they collect information, they come out certain reports, and then the report were discussed, etc. There is a history of that, but that is something which I call theater of dialogue. Yeah. So that is one thing. But if we want to make, if we want to unpack this politics of committee making and the theater of dialogue, we have to be comparative. We have to adopt a comparative approach. What about Nagaland? The dialogue Indian state is having with Naga separatist group are entirely different. Why? Because the nature of the representation of dialogue in that case is different. In case of Kashmir, remember, Kashmir is a buffer state. Kashmir has got a historical relationship with Pakistan. Kashmir has got it's an international UN sort of recognition at some point of time. Therefore, Indian state would like to do a different kind of activity with regard to dialogue there. That is a different politics of dialogue. But when it comes to Nagaland, Indian state does not find it difficult to accept the first phrase that we are accepting, that this is a dialogue between Indian state, sovereign Indian state, and Naga Lim, not Nagaland. Look at the number of different dialogue which happened with Naga separatist groups, you may find not Nagaland, the name of the territory is changed. It means that the theater of dialogue, the politics of dialogue is also highly diversified. And it would be very, it would be highly misleading to think that only one kind of politics, only one interpretation of the politics of dialogue is possible. Okay, so but I'll come to the Babri Masjid point later. Thank you very much for this question. Yeah, is there any other question? Otherwise, I'll
Dr. Ahmed, I want to ask one thing. I've been contemplating on this for pretty long time, and since you come and there are a few students who come from Kashmir, I just am not able to understand this dialogue that happens in the political ambit of Indian politics. Is that moment somebody talks about Kashmir, Muslims are always labeled as traitors. If you look at the history of Article 370 that happened in the Kashmir, it was done by sorry to use that word, I don't want to, but it was a Hindu king, Hari Singh, who was more inclined towards Pakistan than towards India. And it is he who put the whatever precondition that if I join Indian state, my Kashmiriyat has to be maintained, blah, blah, blah. Then why does the political dialogue in Indian scenario of late, it has become more specific that it is Muslim separatists who don't want to be a part of India, rather they are more inclined towards going to Pakistan. I'm not into this. I only fairly am not able to understand that you don't blame the king, you don't blame his idea, you don't blame his, he was unfortunately this was a Hindu king who ruled a Muslim subject. It was vice versa in Delhi, a Muslim king ruling the Hindu subject. India has got long history of these kinds of ruler, So why does this dialogue, as you have started using the word theater, I'm trying to gauge it into a bigger, larger, canvas of politics, that why is it that every time something happens in Kashmir, the Muslims are to be blamed? Article 370 कौन लेकर आया? You will not talk about that. किसको पाकिस्तान के साथ जाना था? You will not talk about that. If there is an unrest in Kashmir, the psychosocial analysis or the psycho-economic analysis is not taken into consideration. But that one thing, that Article 370, who bought Article 370? Whose insistence it was? And why is this dialogue not resolving? That let's come to the point, and let's stop this and talk about development and other issues in Kashmir. The whole valley was on 2G network for I don't know how many years together, 9th August 2019 to now. Students cannot read, people cannot get information, journalists cannot work. Al Jazeera has done a very nice 1-hour program on how journalists are not able to report because of the 2G internet in Kashmir. Who's going to talk about that? That dialogue is missing from the scene. Can you just, since you're in development study, why is it pre-planned? It is premeditated? Is it pre-designed? Or is it that politics takes advantage of the situation and tries to aggravate the situation to push the real issues behind the curtain? Is it like that?
See, there are two answers to that. First answer is historical. The second answer is contemporary. The historical answer is that why Kashmir is always seen through the prism of Hindu-Muslim is because of historical reasons. If you look at the old story of how unification of India took place, and this is a standard story, and in this story we are told that actually there were three culprits who did not decide to merge with India. One was Kashmir,
Nizam,
and Junaid. And incidentally, what about others? Incidentally, these were the black ships. These were the problem areas, because these did not fit into the larger scheme of things. But what about rest? What about, we have more than 560 princely states when India got independence. What about others? What about the idea of privy purse? I do not want to get into 370, etc. There is a long debate on that. But I am a bit uncomfortable with the idea of privy purse. Why, there was 3 or 4 different stages by princely state got merged into the Indian Union. And they were compensated by the government of India. And that was our money, by the way. Both Sardar Patel and Nehru were responsible for that. They somehow bribed them to become part of India. But the politics of the larger politics that was being played out between at least 3 different ideas. One was certainly the partition of India. Partition of India took place largely between Hindu and Muslim thing. And therefore, for Nehru, it was very important that India must remain a secular country. And therefore, the different kind of secular imagination must be strengthened and established. And for that purpose, something which actually goes against Nehru's own principle, privy purse, were given. Not merely that. All these great Rajas, etc., they were accommodated in the realm of politics differently through Rajya Sabha, by giving them tickets to contest elections, etc. So the professional politics of Congress historically contributed a lot into transforming old Raja into new leaders. All our great Sindhyas, all our great, in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, there are a lot of old kings who are basically leaders either of BJP or. So that is my answer to that larger thing in which they were accommodated. That's the historical answer. The contemporary answer is this, that if we look at Kashmir issue, and I don't want to make any statement on that, because from 1957, it is true certainly that 370 was an impermanent sort of a thing. And if you are interested, read what Shama Prasad Mukherjee said about it in the in Lok Sabha. But there is something more in that. Since 1957, the merger of Kashmir into Indian Union continued to take different shapes. And remember when you said Raja Hari Singh versus Abdullah was not a Muslim leader, by the way. He was a radical land reform oriented progressive leader. And that's the reason why Nehru promoted him. There is an interesting discussion in the parliament. There is a very interesting discussion. And I would like all of you to have a look at that discussion, the exchange between Shama Prasad Mukherjee. Remember, Mukherjee was also a very intelligent person. I have a great respect the way in which he conceptualized his ideas. Shama Prasad Mukherjee, who was the founder of Jan Sangh. The way in which he was critical of Nehru, and now he is actually treated as an icon in BJP's frame of things. But Shama Prasad Mukherjee was an intelligent man. He made a very interesting argument with regard to the unification of Kashmir, etc. And he also met Sheikh Abdullah on number of times. So the conversation he had with Abdullah, the way in which he was responding to land reform and merger and the rights of people of Jammu. Remember, we always think of Kashmir as a unified territory. The rights of people and the unease of the people of Jammu was also interesting. So we have to actually look at the Kashmir issue in historically very differently, and the manner in which it comes to us. Remember, BJP is in power since in last 6 years. Before that, most of the time, India was ruled by the Congress. And the anti-Nehru thing, which we get to know now, we find that as if that Nehru is being criticized for the first time. It's absolutely wrong. The criticism of Nehru began before BJP, especially in 90s, especially the policy, including the merger of Kashmir in India, and not by the BJP, even by the leaders of Congress. So therefore, when there, as I said in my initial response to Mushtaq, that the dialogue, the history of dialogue, if we study the history systematically of dialogue with regard to Kashmir, we find that Hindu-Muslim thing is always has always been a reference point, because because the specific location of territory called Kashmir, that specific location contributed a lot to the ways in which it was understood by the Indian state. So therefore, what is happening now is not merely a very designed attempt by the present government. It has got its own history. And therefore, when Mehbooba Mufti yesterday said that BJP is actually getting rid of constitution, she is absolutely wrong. Because remember, she was detained. And for the first time, a partner in politics is detained by another partner. That's an interesting thing. But she was, at that time when election took place, she decided not to go with other non-BJP parties, and that's also a historical fact. So we have to remember, these complexities of politics. Yes, Azad, if you want to say something. Azad. Yeah.
Sorry, sir. I am outside my home. I mean, I'm in village, so my network may be a bit weaker. I want to share one point. I mean, from my perspective, sorry, I'm very much sorry, but I want to mention this point. If I see the history of this Indian subcontinent, let's say I am from Bangladesh, from Dhaka, Bangladesh. Last time I was reading an article regarding the political dialogue among the parties, even at the beginning of the Bangladesh independence, when our great leader Bangabandhu was talking with the leader from Pakistan, Yahya Khan Ayub Khan, in this Indian subcontinent, most of the cases, this political dialogue was not successful. This is my point of view. Also, I was reading an article regarding it. Whenever two parties equal in power, then only another party is considering or trying to listen. Otherwise, most of the cases, they are not sacrificing. They are not giving any float to them. Even they are right or if they are wrong. They are not, even talk to each other. Let's say in case of Kashmir or any other, even the current situation in all the world. Let's say in Armenia or in Azerbaijan, two parties, they don't want to talk to each other. Whenever a superpower come to there, then they agree to talk to each other. So, my point is it would be, this whatever there are many theory about the dialogue. Whenever when only one point dialogue is going to be successful, when two parties very close to each other. Otherwise, if for any marginalized people, you cannot see, at least in this subcontinent, the dialogue is successful. If any party took the side of the marginalized people, then in that case, dialogue becomes successful. Otherwise, it was not successful at all. I don't. This is the condition of this Indian subcontinent. This is the point I want to make. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Azad. Two things which now I would like to underline. First is that we should not entirely reduce it to the known case studies, say Kashmir, South Asia, Bangladesh, etc. Because the larger purpose is to talk about politics of dialogue. So your point is well taken, but this is something which Sabiha ji and to some extent I do not subscribe to. In my view, I think that there are instances, and Shabista also raised this question in a different way. In my view, it would be important to recognize the issue of conflict or agreement in the larger scheme of things before making any judgment on the success or failure. By the way, for example, as I said, that sometime it became very crucial. If suppose the state would like to prolong or delay something, what is the best option available to it? The best available solution is to constitute a committee or to invite people to dialogue. So sometimes dialogues are always organized in order not to resolve the issue, but rather to give some kind of a legitimacy to conflict. So therefore, we cannot generalize dialogue as an act which will always contribute to success and failure. And that's the final point which I would like to make, is that the success and failure are rather misleading indicators to evaluate any dialogue which we are going to study. So this is about my response to you, Azad. Is there any I have scope for one more question, and then I'll move to the second part of my presentation.
Can I speak, sir?
Yeah.
So I was just with regards to what the conversation that we've been having so far, and you used a very wonderful analogy of how dialogue is it's just a theater. The entire politics of dialogue is just a theater. So the entire performativity, I mean, there has to be an outcome when every what should I say? Every piece of theater has an outcome. मतलब हर एक नाटक का एक अंत होता है. There is something that leads to something. I think what happens, I mean, this is not a question, it's just something that came to my mind, is that I think because the point that you were just mentioning about conflict, we should not, judge it along it being a success or it being a failure. And something that even like whatever reading I have done so far, it has been that dialogue is not, we tend to see it from the lens of conflict resolution, but that is not what it actually happens. Like, that's not how it is performed. It's essentially performed on the field of conflict management. Like, you're just trying to manage the entire situation, specifically in cases where it's a protracted conflict, like it was in Bangladesh or it is in Kashmir right now. So that entire sense, I mean, it's very, because obviously the government also takes advantage, or the state takes advantage of that fuzziness, that fuzzy understanding that we have of dialogue. Like, what is a dialogue supposed to do? If we have constituted a committee is supposed to give us the results. If they are a part of this theater, this performance has to come to end somehow. We will have an end. Every movie ends into something. You have a closure. Like, I think in the subcontinent in South Asia, we are very dramatic people. We are addicted to these finalized endings. So we just want an end. We want to know what was the outcome. But I think like that is something which takes away a lot from what gets achieved in that entire performativity of the dialogue. And another thing was that in dialogue, I mean, as I think Sabiha ji also said, and I think Shabista was also pointing out about, I think Azad pointed out that you need to have someone who's powerful on your side in order to, for the dialogue to lead into something. I think there is nobody, I think, would deny the existence of power hierarchies even when dialogue is there. I mean, power hierarchies exist everywhere. Even when we are talking right now here, some sort of hierarchy is established in a certain manner. I am talking right now, everyone is quiet. This is a power hierarchy in itself. So every form of dialogue inherently has a power hierarchy that comes with it. So that cannot be denied. So I think it's just, I'm not saying that we should not have expectations from dialogue, because that's what I am doing. So that would be negating my own work. We should be having expectations from dialogue, but we should not be having those over the top dramatic subcontinent South Asian expectations from dialogue, because dialogue is not supposed, it's not a magic wand that I got two people to talk and now they're never going to fight. Because even my personal experience, I like sitting in focus groups and getting people to talk, like because I did it in context of Kashmir, there were Kashmiri Pandits and there were Kashmiri Muslims. I did initiate it because I mean, we are all very starry-eyed when we start off. So I wanted to do like, okay, okay, I'm just getting these people now, they're never going to fight with each other. But that does not happen. I think even in midst of dialogue, they were literally hurling abuses at each other. And it was very shocking for me because I was not expecting my focus group to go like that. So, but that happened. And at the same time, they were also reminiscing. We used to go to the same school. We lived in the same locality. So I think it's one just has to balance it. It's not a magic one. Dialogue is not going to do something magical for anybody at all. It's not about a consensus. It is never about a consensus. It's probably a peaceful exchange of ideas, getting to know what hurt you and what hurt me, because we have instances of dialogue where dialogue has been really transformative. It has been extremely transformative, but it has not been culminative in the sense that it has given governments a power to say something that now this thing is completely solved. Nobody is ever going to make a grudge out of it or do anything about it. I don't think so. I mean, I think we all have to like start from there as South Asians, as these dramatic people from the subcontinent, to stop expecting miracles out of dialogue, because I don't think as sane people that is not ever going to happen. That's pretty much that.
Thank you, Musa. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for making these two very important points. As I said, that I'm not responding to or to answer you, rather just to add to what you said or my interpretation of the question which you raised. These are not comments, these are absolutely great questions for all of us to think about. So my response to you, as I said, is just to contribute to what you said. And in that way, I think you made a very powerful point about the idea of closure. To expect closure, obviously, it all depends on, first of all, we have to think of the context in which dialogue is organized. This is linked to what Sabiha ji initially said, that what is the context. So in a context when you are organizing your groups, focus group discussion, that's a different context in which all the participants can see each other. They can also raise their voices. They can also, with the starry eyes, etc. They can do everything because there is a tangibility involved in that process. You know you are talking, whom you are talking to. But there is another possibility in which, and that's why the theater and performity is very crucial, in which dialogue is publicized as solution to a problem. And it is organized in the realm of existing power structure. So when it is organized like this, and when it is publicized like this, then the most important question is, who would be the representative of one party? First of all, how many parties? Second, who would be the representative? So the representativeness would become very important. Third is, who is the organizer? In this case, if you are organizing something, but in the larger case, it could be state, it could be an international body. So that international body would acquire some kind of a different power of determining terms and terms of discourse. That is another important thing. So if we just analyze, again, this is a bit rather abstract, but if we analyze this framework, then the idea of closure would completely change in two different ways. One is that closure, we always remember, closure is actually a new beginning. Every closure is a new beginning. So if we narrativize something, it does not mean that it will start, it will a middle, and it will an end. But every end, because we human beings, there is a lot of discussion in philosophy on this question, how we narrativize, etc. I don't want to get into that. But larger point is that we always think of things in narratives, and therefore there is an emphasis on the idea of closure. Somehow we want disclosure. The entire idea of Qayamat, end of universe, is something is also coming to us in a sense of a closure. But if we just get rid of this finite idea of Qayamat or closure, just think of the idea of God, which is infinite, which is absolute, and things like that. Because we have and this is the theoretical answer to the point which we are making, because we have got a finite mind and we are thinking of infinite things, therefore the idea of God will always going to remain, and therefore the idea of closure would remain central to us. So therefore, philosophically speaking, idea of closure is an important idea, but it is an idea and a reference point. It does not mean that it is going to determine the way in which a conflict is going to be resolved, an issue is discussed. Issues are not humans. They are not born like us. They do not get matured the way we get matured. And they are not resolved by one generation. So the generational aspect or the spread of conflict also continue to play a significant role. And Arab-Israel conflict is one such example. We have 4 or 5 generations gone. The earlier generation did not have, did have very different imagination of us and then, etc. But now they have got, they are in a different territory. So the history of conflict itself started determining the way in which we think of beginning and closure. So therefore, the idea of closure is a reference point. It's not an outcome. It will always remain with us. We should have some kind of a commitment to idea of closure. But it does not mean that the closure will be the way in which we think of closure. So that's to your first point. It will take different new forms. That, with Babri Masjid example, I'll give you a few things to think about. Now, the second point is the representativeness of someone. I think I answered that. But what kind of power to influence a dialogue? Who is powerful? So there could be different possibility in that case. There is an interesting book by Mushtaqul Haq. It's called Gandhi's Trial, where Gandhi is arrested and he was charged of sedition, etc. And he responded very powerfully to the magistrate that the charges which are put on me are very less. I think you should put more charges on me because I am doing this. So the power of submission, he's not asserting his right, like he's not a violent person, he's not killing so many people, but power of submission is also a different sort of power. So the negotiating power is not entirely the power the way in which we understand power. There are different ways in which we can think of. But now the final point is about a very good book and a very good person. His name is Rahul Pandita. I think you must be knowing him. His book called Our Moon Has Got a...
Our Moon Has Blood Clots.
Yeah. So that's a wonderful book because it describes a phenomena from a different point of view. Now, if we, and he's not Hindutvawadi, he's critical of Hindutva as well, but he is making an argument which is a complex argument. So how to respond to this complex argument? Now, in the dialogic form which we are accustomed of, it is very difficult to accommodate someone called Rahul Pandita's argument. So therefore, is it the problem of argument or is it the problem of framework? So I think the framework is a problem. So I'll stop here, and if you have any other question, then I'll move to the second part of it. Any other question or any other comment? Okay, so it's 4:30 now. So let's have a 5 minutes break, and then I'll come with a different set of observations with regard to a concrete case, which is called Babri Masjid Ram Janambhoomi case in Ayodhya, because it's quite contemporary. And I find that this case can tell us more about the ways in which politics of dialogue is played out. So, Behzad, can I take a 5 minutes break?
Of course, sir.
Yeah.
course.
So it's 4:13, 4:28 now. So we'll begin at 4:33.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Welcome
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. Sorry, I took more time.
It's okay.
Because it's a namaz time, so so I had to pray my Asr prayer. So now I am back. So all of them are back, or shall we wait for some time?
We can resume, sir.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So now what I am going to do is to talk about a concrete case. Now, this concrete case, because whatsoever discussion which we had so far was based on an abstract idea. And for me, abstract formulations are important because these are reference points for us to think closely about the case which we are going to study. But I do not always make this distinction because the distinction between theory and empirical is very misleading. Most of the time, remember that theoretical arguments are deeply embedded in the empirical cases. So therefore, if one abstract idea that is coming out from a particular case acquire a status of being a theoretical formulation, should not always be understood as an autonomous entity. It will always have some kind of a relationship with some kind of a reality. One. Second is that when we move into a deeper, higher level of theorization, where we need where we move from idea to idea in typical Hegelian framework, I think this is also crucial and important that we must pay close attention to the ways in which one set of ideas is related to another set of ideas. So therefore, the reference point is always and should be the reality, because if we link one idea to another idea, that's also part of a different different realities of ideas. So the larger point which I am trying to make is simply this, that abstract formulation should not always be reduced to the abstraction, and in order to analyze them, we need to have some concrete things. But there are two important problems when we talk about the empirical. Most of the time, we think that, and that's a typical Western theory, non-Western world sort of thing. I think it is very important that we always realize that the typical social science style of doing thing is this, that certain Western theories are available to us, and we have to put these theoretical modern in our reality and then describe our reality through the prism of Western theories. I don't believe in that. Western theoretical traditions are very powerful and relevant for us, but they would always remain as reference points. No, and we have to learn from them, evolve our theoretical tool, and try closely to look at our empirical reality, and then do something which I call construction of theory. And this is precisely what I am going to do with these. I won't say that I'm going to construct a theory. Rather, I would use the process which I just described.
Yeah.
Sorry, is there any comment or something? No. So I use this I use the description, the explanation which I just gave, to explain what a particular case which I have studied more closely for over 2 decades, and try to find out the relevance of that case for what I call politics of dialogue. So this is an initial statement to place Babri Masjid, Ram Janam Bhoomi thing in a framework. Now, unlike others, when I started working on this question on Babri Masjid Ram Janam Bhoomi, I was not interested in the given stories of conflict. Rather, I was interested in the agreements in which different narratives of the conflicts are having. For example, there is an agreement that there is a building called Babri Masjid, and this structure called Babri Masjid is, first of all, highly unimportant for all. That's the second thing. First is that there is a place called Ram Janam Bhoomi, Ayodhya. That site was recognized as the reference point for conflict by all the parties, be it Hindutva, be it Muslim Muslim political groups, or the secular historians. So they all agree on one, that there is a site which is contested. They all agree that the structure is unimportant. Now that's the crucial point. And I have written extensively on this question, why structure became so unimportant for all of them. And they were keen to use the space, the land. Land became so powerful. There was an agreement that this conflict is for the land, not the structure, even for the Muslim parties. Even both the Muslim parties, Babri Masjid Movement Coordination Committee, All India Muslim Personal Law Board, which is a party now in the case, All India Sunni Waqf Board, which is also a party, all of them over the years decided not to talk about the structure called Babri Masjid, and their emphasis was on the land. The reason why the land became so important for all of them, because first of all, for the Hindutvavadi, naturally their claim was that this is the very site where Lord Ram was born. So they agree on this, and there is a strong assertion that Ram was born. And their argument was that the temple was desecrated or demolished by Babur to construct this building. Now, the Muslim parties initially said that a mosque cannot be removed or cannot be built on another land. And their argument was that this is a Waqf land. And Waqf is always dedicated in the name of Allah. So therefore, the land is important because this land on which a mosque is built. So from the very beginning, their argument was primarily in relation to the piousness of the land, because it was technically a Waqf land. So therefore, building of the mosque was not central component in their political imagination. What is interesting in this, the third party, was the secular elite. Secular, when I say secular elite, they describe themselves as secular. And when I say, why do I say them as elite? Because most of them, in fact, started producing books and articles supporting the Muslim case without looking at the weaknesses which were inherent in the Muslim party's argument. Okay, so surprisingly, they also supported the argument made by both the Muslim parties at that point in 1986, Babri Masjid Movement Coordination Committee and Babri Masjid Action Committee. I'll come to these two committees later on, but the central point is that there was an agreement that we are fighting not for the structure called Babri Masjid, but the land. So this distinction between land and structure was the important issue even before the demolition of Babri Masjid. Babri Masjid was demolished in 1992, and the struggle to remove it or to protect it from both the sides started in 1986.
for first 6 years, the conflict again was not on the thing called Babri Masjid, the mosque, because no one or no Muslim group said that we need this mosque for offering prayers. So therefore, the first thing is that the land was given more importance in comparison to the structure which was on it. So the first point of reference, that there was an agreement that we are fighting for land, not the structure. There is a conflict, fine. Ram was born or not, Babur's presence was there or not, but the piousness of the land as Waqf versus piousness of the land as the birthplace of Lord Ram. That was the main conflict. Okay. Now, because there was an agreement of this conflict, let us just go back to the legal case and how dialogue actually began in this process. First is that there was a building, and like many other contested building in North India, that was also contested. And this was not contested entirely with relation to the claim that Ram was born there. This building was also contested because there was a Shia and Sunni conflict over it. There was an, in fact, legal court case in 1936 when Shias of UP claimed their ownership on this mosque, saying that it's a Shia mosque. And the court favored the Sunni party, saying that it's a Sunni mosque because although it was built by built by Mir Baqi, who was the governor of Babur, but the money was given to him by Babur, who was a Sunni. So that's the argument which was given by a local court in favor of Sunni party, and that was in 1936. And then there are a lot of debates on religious places of worship is not entirely new in our country. It has its own long history. But what is significant is in 1885, for the first time, when a local magistrate refused to grant permission to construct a makeshift temple in the premises. Remember that the structure. Let me also tell you a bit about the structure. And we don't know. We do not have any record why that has happened like this. There was a building called Babri Masjid, and inside the Babri Masjid there was something called Ram Chabutra. So Babri Masjid structure was like that. That there was a building, and there was a Wazu Khana outside it, and outside Wazu Khana, within the boundaries of that building, there was something called Ram Chabutra, where a makeshift temple of Lord Ram was built by, we don't know when, but Ram Chabutra was an important component of Babri Masjid when it got disputed in 1885 or in 1854, not 1885. So we did not have any story or any history of at what time Ram Chabutra came into being. And we just, and this is very significant because the presence of temple inside Babri Masjid was always there. We cannot say that temple was not there. It was inside the outer boundaries of the mosque. Okay, so we must remember this is the complicated story. Now this complicated story became more complicated when colonial judiciary started treating as this conflict as a Hindu-Muslim conflict. Remember, you may find in Mumbai or in different part of the world, in different part of India, I find that mosque and temple built together, or the presence of a temple inside a mosque boundary is not unusual. But what is interesting in this case is that when the first case in 1885, when the demand to construct this, when the demand to repair that temple came up, the magistrate refused to give grant to the local pujari. And he said that you cannot construct this. Why? because it is a very long pending historical conflict between Hindus and Muslims. So the universalization of a local conflict into a civilizational conflict became very evident in 1885. And since then, we all remember what we have to situate this conflict in the larger domain of, in the larger scheme of things. We know what really happened in colonial India, where communalism was a very powerful phenomenon, and how communalism in UP contributed to this case is another. There's a lot of things which I have written on, and which is which is there extensively. You may find how Babri Masjid became part of the civilization conflict of Hindu and Muslim for a long time. So then it comes to 1949, when a systematic attempt was laid by local Hindu organizations, and they led a mob, and this mob actually entered the mosque. Remember, not Ram Chabutra. They entered the mosque proper. Remember, temple and mosque coexisted before 1949. But in 1949, the mob, in December 1949, the mob entered and they placed idol inside the mosque for the first time. And the argument they gave is that not Ram Chabutra is the birthplace of Ram. The very member where the sermon, where the sermon is delivered, the very inside, the internal part of internal, the three dome of the structure. I don't have map at the moment, so I cannot show you. They argued that actually the birthplace of Ram is inside the mosque. So they did not answer the question why Ram Chabutra is outside. They emphasize on the fact that Ram was born inside the mosque. So therefore, the contest over land became so powerful. Now remember that this is not about the structure. It is more about the land. So they argued that land, inside land of a mosque is pious because Ram was born inside the mosque. So that was the contest which began. So the rest of the story I won't go into, because there was a legal case, etc. And this legal case did not find any political overtone in 50s and 60s somehow. But in 1986, the things changed. So let me tell you what really happened in 1986. From 1949, it was a conflict between local Hindus versus local Muslim in a local case. Again, it was a very localized dispute. Like many other disputes in India, it was also very localized. In 1960, UP Sunni Waqf Board became a party of it. So it became a state level conflict, because the state Waqf Board is party to it. It's not a national issue. But something very interesting happened in 1986, when the locks of Babri Masjid were opened by a local magistrate. And why is that so? When Babri Masjid was captured by the Hindu mob, it was freezed. And it was decided that not merely Hindus, but also Muslim would not be allowed to go and perform namaz inside the mosque. But surprisingly, the idols were not removed from the mosque. Remember, it was freezed legally without removing the idols, which was an additional thing to the disputed thing. It was a disputed entity. Remember, suppose if I captured something and I put something of mine inside without, so if that thing is possessed by, if it is freezed by the law, then the entity which I left inside would become part of it after 12 years. So the Hindu parties in 1954
requested the magistrate say that idols are inside, we should be allowed to offer bhog to idol every day. So court accepted this minor demand, and a pujari was appointed, and this pujari would go inside and offer bhog to the idol and come back. This thing continued from 1954 to 1986. Arguing that this is a Hindu practice inside a mosque continued for more than 12 years. A petition was filed in the local court accepted, and it said that Hindu practices had been happening inside mosque. Therefore, there is no harm if this building is opened for all Hindus to perform puja. And this led to the opening of Babri Masjid in 1986. Okay. So again, Hindu parties were allowed, Hindus of all over India were allowed to go inside the mosque, and they started worshipping the idols which were already there since 1949. Remember, now in the legal conflict, we have two entities now, idols and the mosque. And these, when the idols are not removed, they also acquired some kind of a legal sanctioning. So therefore, legally, the legal existence of Lord Ram as an entity inside the mosque was legitimized because according to law, if a property is possessed more than 12 years by another party, technically the property would be treated as his or her property. This is called adverse possession. So by this limitation law and the final judgment which came up last year also used this argument. Okay, I know this is a very detailed, boring thing, but the theoretical point which I am going to extract out of it also depend on this. Something very interesting happened as I said, that in 1986, the locks of the mosque were opened and virtually the mosque became a temple. So those Hindutvavadi who argue that Ram temple should be liberated, it was liberated in 1986 and in fact in 1944, because since 1944, there is no Babri Masjid. It is a temple because it is a temple where we have idols, and these idols are always given bhog. It means that functionality of Hinduism is practiced inside that building, and therefore a functional temple was there. This functional temple in 1986 actually acquired a different status, and now any Hindu can go inside and perform puja, but no Muslim is allowed to perform namaz. So therefore, technically, it was always a Ram temple. Now coming back to the Muslim parties, there were, one committee was constituted, which is an umbrella organization, which was called Babri Masjid Movement Coordination Committee. And this committee got, it was the first organization in post-colonial India where all the Muslim groups come together. But because this is not entirely political initially, the politicians also, getting into this, and different political party also got interested into these two, into Babri Masjid Movement Coordination Committee. As a result, this committee is divided. Later on, there was a split in this committee, and two entities came into existence. One was Babri Masjid Movement Coordination Committee, led by late Sayyid Shahabuddin, and another was Babri Masjid Action Committee, led by the Imam of Jama Masjid, Sayyid Abdullah Bukhari, Delhi's Jama Masjid's Imam. So what is interesting is that on the other hand, there was different kind of Hindu groups, but Vishwa Hindu Parishad was the leading group. What Vishwa Hindu Parishad did, interestingly, they filed a petition in the High Court saying that we would like to be treated as a legal party in this case. and court somehow accepted this demand, and they, for the first time in 1989, became a legal party in the dispute. So therefore, this is the background in which in 1990, when in 1991, in fact, Government of India decided to invite, and this is very interesting, a dialogue. Decided to invite Muslims and Muslim and Hindu parties to resolve Babri Masjid conflict and to have dialogue on this question. So the first negotiation of this kind happened in 1991 between Shankaracharya of, I think it was Puri Shankaracharya, and Alimiya Nadvi from Nadwa. What is interesting is that Shankaracharya's candidature was questioned by different Hindu parties. And there was a court case against Alimiya Nadvi questioning his status as the representative of Muslim. So the question of representation became very important, and therefore both Shankaracharya and Nadvi decided not to continue with negotiation. Later on, the second phase, I think 6 months later, the government of India also initiated a different kind of dialogue in which Babri Masjid Movement Coordination Committee was invited from the Muslim party, while from the Hindu party, interestingly, VHP was invited. By recognizing Babri Masjid Movement Coordination Committee as representative Muslims or VHP as the representative of Hindus, somehow Indian state legitimized their status as the representative of two large communities of India, Hindu and Muslim. Now, therefore, the point is that the question of representation is very crucial in dialogic processes. And who is going to decide who is the representative? This is the state. So if we look at there are three things. One is who is going to represent whom? Large Muslim population, which has nothing to do with Babri Masjid, became a party. And Babri Masjid Movement Coordination Committee, or later on Babri Masjid Action Committee, were transformed into the representative of that Muslim community. Oh, Behzad is saying that we have to conclude. But Behzad, I think you said that I have got 3 hours. 6 o'clock we were supposed to close.
No, well, yesterday I told you that we have 3 and 5, 3 to 5 actually for this session. But
okay, let me just quickly sum up. Yeah, okay, fine. I'm sorry. I thought that I have got another 1 hour, so that's why. I'm sorry. Okay.
Maybe we can take half an hour more.
No. I want others to speak. So sure. I'll just make my final points and then I'll stop. Now, so the 3 things which I was talking about. One is that Hindus and Muslims were envisaged as 2 conflicting parties. Remember that these Hindus and Muslims were highly diversified. They were not entirely, we don't know their relationship with Babri Masjid Ram Janmabhoomi temple issue, because that was not, we don't have any referendum, etc., by which we can decide that actually that was a central universal civilizational conflict between these 2 religions. In fact, when we started doing survey on this in 1996 onward, we find a very mixed attitude of Hindus and Muslims. We always get that 50% Muslims would say we are not interested in Babri Masjid, or Hindu would say we are not interested in Ram Temple, etc. But in 1991, Indian state somehow categorically linked Babri Masjid to all of us. So the dialogue which was going to happen, and the performity of dialogue which these 2 parties were trying to adjust, trying to enact, were somehow decided by the state itself. The second thing is about the power of the state to use this act of dialogue to get some kind of a legitimacy. Remember that was not what is the imagination of the state in Indian constitution. the state is supposed to be the interventionist state, so that the society, the conflict of the society cannot merely be resolved, but society can be transformed into a higher stage. That's an imagination of the idea of a state in the constitution. But that imagination does not entirely fit with the politics of dialogue which we saw in Babri Masjid case, where state actually tend to describe itself as an entity which is a conflict management as a conflict management agency, and therefore has got some kind of a ultimate power to decide what is the central problematic of Indian society and who is going to represent whom. So the question of representation was something like that. What is interesting, and this is my final point in these negotiations, that both the parties decided not to resolve the issue. They struggled a lot. If you look at the proceedings, they struggle a lot to continue with dialogue. And remember, when Babri Masjid was demolished on 6th of December 1992, the process of dialogue was also going on. So the point I'm trying to make is that the politics of dialogue is something which always relies on its endurance. In good thing, in a positive sense, it will become a reference point for future negotiations or future resolves. In a negative sense, it will somehow used to stabilize or to legitimize the presence of state as the ultimate authority, a governing authority in a society. So I stop here. So if you have a few comments or questions, I would be happy to answer.
Dr. Hilal, just a question related to Babri Masjid. How correct is this thing that what Maulana Wahiduddin Khan and also Arif Muhammad Khan states related to Babri Masjid, think that there was a certain kind of a negotiation between Ali Mia and Rajiv Gandhi, because its background was the Shah Banu kind of case in which there was a ulama kind of movement to overturn the Supreme Court decision about triple talaq. So how much was that kind of background really basically the background of Shah Banu case that became a prelude for opening up the Babri Masjid gates and renewing this Babri Masjid dispute once again, because again Rajiv Gandhi had to appease to a large, huge electorate. So how this criticism of Arif Muhammad Khan or Maulana Wahiduddin Khan, how much relevant is it according to you?
Yeah, quickly, you are right, because Ali Mia himself, in his autobiography, Ali Mia Nadwi wrote a very interesting 6-volume autobiography. It's called Arwan is Zindagi. Yeah, in which he said that he was hoping that Rajiv Gandhi would listen to him again like Shah Banu. So, the presence of ulama or the religious elite in politics somehow got legitimacy during the time of Shah Banu. And it was very unfortunate, by the way, because somehow what Rajiv Gandhi did, and there is a lot of things which have been written later on. What Rajiv Gandhi did, he also promotes some kind of a rightist politics of Hindutva kind. And this is not Rajiv Gandhi. This process actually started in 84. In 1984, when first Rath Yatra led by BHP, Indira Gandhi was supposed to inaugurate that. So therefore, the changed policy of Congress in post 1980 is something which is very significant. It relied heavily on the religious issues, if you look at the way in which Punjab crisis was dealt, the way in which Shah Banu was dealt, and the way in which Babri Masjid Ram Temple issue is dealt by the Congress, it shows a pattern.
And in this pattern, fundamentalism of different kind is always legitimized in order to get some kind of a justification of to present itself as the authority over the conflict, the state's presence as a conflict managing agency and things like that. So you are right, I agree with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other question quickly?
Dr. Hilal, I was just wondering when you told about this politics of Ram Mandir, Babri Masjid issue, that they deliberately never wanted to finish the dialogue. They wanted to always remain it on a maybe second level of flow that was there in the this thing. Uh, and probably it was a fueling system of gaining popularity to come to power by XYZ, whosoever it may be. I just want to ask you, since you've done a very extensive this thing, that the kind of hullabaloo that we saw between 1999 till date in the nation's Hindu psyche, we never saw that hullabaloo in the Muslim psyche. Like we never saw Muslims ghettoizing together and collecting money when the case was in the court, and carving makarana white marble to make a masjid over there because it was still it was sub judice, it was there in the Supreme Court. And I don't know how come the political lineage of the country started connecting the underworld like Dawood Ibrahim to Babri Masjid. Dawood Ibrahim in his whole life is from Konkan. I know his birthplace. It is here near Dapoli. He must have not even heard about Uttar Pradesh. Forget about going to Uttar Pradesh. But then the whole dialogue was made in such a way as if the entire underworld is very kind of getting, like jittery about getting the Babri Masjid in favor of Muslims. How come this happened? I'm very inquisitive to know what business Dawood Ibrahim and Chota Shakil and Tiger Memon had to do with Babri Masjid because they did plant bomb in Bombay. I don't know. I just want to know because I get very intrigued that a person who has never gone to UP, why is he interested in a masjid which is built ages together? And if he has to do something, he'll do in Mumbai. Why will he go all the way to UP and do things like that? I am still not able to understand that. No, which I don't. I'm not on the sides of terrorists. Please, whosoever is a terrorist is not my friend. I'm making it very clear. Whosoever, XYZ, whatever name he may be having. But the idea of political dialogue, like connecting everything to a particular kind of a community, is fairly, I would say, it's performing harakiri. I don't know why. Nation will never grow.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you. There are 2-3 things which we must remember while looking at these things. In fact, you are making two sort of arguments. One is about the relationship between criminals and politics, and the other thing is that why radicalization of Hindus. These are two very different things. Radicalization of Hindus, I would argue that somehow that radicalization is inextricably linked to what I call majoritarianism. And this majoritarianism is something which is very important. Remember that when we say majoritarianism, it is not entirely about Hindus and Muslims. Majoritarianism meaning is that the ways in which you take your victimhood as a point of reference and try to articulate a position to argue that my number also matter. So this number game is not entirely Hindu and Muslim. So therefore, look at Kashiram. His whole idea was that different castes should come together and constitute what he calls Bahujan, meaning majority. Look at what Indira Gandhi was saying in 1980. It's a very powerful statement. Remember, in 1980, Congress's slogan was Bahujan Hitai, Bahujan Sukhai. What is Bahujan? Majority. 1980 onward, the trajectory of Indian politics is dominated by the idea of majority and victimhood. So I am the victim of system, yet despite the fact I have numbers. That somehow captured initially by Shiv Sena in Mumbai, in Maharashtra. Later on, when Babri Masjid happened, remember the significance of Babri Masjid. There were many things which were happening since 1947. But somehow Babri Masjid dispute provided a unique reference point, a tangible entity, which become a symbol in itself. That this is the symbol. And by referring to this symbol, I can justify cow, I can justify marginalization of Hindi, I can justify Hindu victimhood of all kind. So that symbolic capacity of Babri Masjid must be recognized. That's the first part of majoritarianism. The second part is criminalization of politics and the role of criminals in politics. And this is a highly unexplored area. Why? Because, and there are a lot of sociological studies on that. Since 50s, the whole idea, initially what happened, when political parties started getting into the realm of competitive politics, remember they are also professionals. A politician is not going there to change the society. His purpose as a contestant in election is to win election. So the winnability factor was always important. So if you are going to win the election, what is required? You have to speak the language in which is a market-like situation. You are a firm and you are going to sell something. So you have to rely the language in which your consumers speak. That means that you have to speak the language which consumers or the voter would understand. So you are not there to remove communalism. Rather, you are there to strengthening communalism of different kind for competitive benefits. And for this, you require the power structure. And the power structure is there. We have Chota Shakil. We have, in fact, Latif, famous Latif in Gujarat, who was instrumental in the business of liquor. He was also very powerful. So the communalization of politics somehow get into, because they were deeply ingrained. The criminals, underworld, and Indian politics, they were deeply ingrained. But when the discourse changed in 90s and the discourse of socialism, anti-Congressism is replaced by Hindu-Muslim, it became inevitable for the political elite of all sorts to establish a link between Muslim criminals and Hindu criminals. And it is not merely because they were in the realm of the popular discourse, like three things. One, Bollywood, second, cricket, and third is underworld. So this is not merely what is the relationship between a Pakistani cricket team winning a cricket match and Babri Masjid. But the first Babri Masjid riot that took place in Delhi somehow intrinsically linked to that win. The last 6 Javed Miadat hit in Sharjah. If you just look at the dates, you may find that. So therefore, the point which I am trying to make is that there is something called popular discourse. And this popular discourse somehow started explaining the complex everyday life which we all live in the realm of politics. Thank you for this question. Yeah. Any other question? Otherwise, we call it a day.
Yes. Do we have any more question? Maybe one more question and then we can conclude if there is any. Otherwise, we'll conclude right away. Okay, I think there is no more question. All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Hilal Ahmed, for joining us today, especially after what happened with someone in your family. I'm sure everybody here would join me in extending our condolences to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.